Before hell was conceived in the language of men, before judgment was announced to the prophets, even before the fall entered history, there was already a structure in place to exclude beings from the very continuity of creation. Enoch travels through regions where light behaves strangely, where space seems to lose cohesion, and where the sensation is not of heat or pain, but of complete abandonment of the divine presence. He finds not a place made for correction, nor for education, nor for purification, but a space constructed with frightening precision to contain that which has become incompatible with existence. There is no process there, no defense, no possibility of return, because the decision has already been made, even before the transgression occurs. And what Enoch witnesses is not justice in motion. It is exclusion in progress. When we compare Enoch 21 with descriptions of hell in later Christian tradition, especially those developed and refined throughout the Middle Ages, we immediately realize that we are not dealing with the same concept, nor even with related concepts operating within the same cosmological system. The Christian hell, especially as systematically developed by scholastic theologians and indelibly popularized by Dante Alighieri in his Divine Comedy, is fundamentally a place of moral punishment where human sinners are sent after death to pay for their transgressions, according to an ethical code that corresponds to revealed divine law. There is a logic of retributive justice operating clearly. There is a carefully calibrated correspondence between the crime committed and the punishment applied. There is a structure that makes sense within an ethical system comprehensible to human minds that think in terms of moral cause and effect. Dante divided his hell into concentric circles where each type of sin receives its appropriate punishment, where the lustful are lashed by eternal winds, where gluttons are devoured by putrid rain, where heretics are burned in flaming tombs, and all this infernal architecture makes sense within a logic of poetic justice, where punishment reflects the nature of the crime. Enoch 21 does not operate within this logic on any level. The place described is not Sheol, that generic and somber place of the dead in ancient Hebrew tradition where all souls went after death, regardless of their moral behavior in life, a place of silence and oblivion without active punishment. It is not Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom, historically associated with practices of child sacrifice and later transformed into a symbol of destruction and disposal. A place where what is useless and impure is burned and eliminated. It is not Tartarus, that Greek mythological prison briefly mentioned in the New Testament, where the Titans were confined after being defeated by the Olympian gods, a place of containment for rebellious divine beings. The terminology used in the Ethiopian text, when analyzed philologically and compared with similar uses in other apocalyptic texts of the period, indicates something fundamentally different from all these categories. A cosmic confinement structure that exists outside of normal procedural time, prepared before the final judgment occurs, functioning as a dimensional vault where certain beings are removed from operative reality without being completely destroyed, maintained in a state of suspended existence that is neither life nor death in the common sense of those terms. What makes this truly disturbing when we examine the text closely is that there is no trial underway in that place, no judicial process unfolding where evidence is presented and evaluated. There is no angelic court presided over by celestial authorities assessing testimonies and weighing evidence. There is no sentence being discussed among judges considering mitigating and aggravating circumstances. There is no deliberation, no appeal, no possibility of review. The verdict has already been given before these beings were confined there, probably at the very moment they committed their transgression. And what Enoch is witnessing is not the process of justice in operation, but the final result of a decision that has already been made at a level of authority that transcends any possible appeal, any imaginable intercession, any possibility of reconsideration. This generates a profound and genuine intellectual discomfort because it directly challenges the comfortable idea that every wrong can be corrected if there is sincere repentance, that every sin can be forgiven if there is true contrition, that there is always an opportunity for redemption for those who genuinely repent and seek change. This idea of unlimited mercy and potential universal forgiveness is so deeply rooted in modern Christian theology that the notion that there could be absolutely undesirable transgressions seems almost heretical, almost incompatible with the nature of a loving God. But Enoch 21 suggests precisely this, that there are errors of such magnitude, transgressions of such a nature, violations so fundamental to the creational order that they render the transgressor permanently incompatible with the continuity of creation, not through divine vengeance, not through arbitrary cruelty, but through structural necessity, through the ontological impossibility of reintegration. The beings imprisoned in Enoch 21 are not generic demons of popular imagination, not horned devils with tridents inherited from medieval iconography, not evil spirits wandering the earth causing random problems. They are the Watchers, entities meticulously described in Enoch 6 as high-ranking angels who were given a specific and crucial administrative function in creation: to observe humanity without directly interfering, to mediate between heaven and earth by keeping channels of communication open, to maintain the order of natural processes by ensuring that the seasons occur in their time and that cosmic cycles remain stable. These were not beings evil by nature or rebellious by temperament from the beginning. They were not entities created for evil or predisposed to destruction. They were an integral part of the divine governance system, first-rate angels with direct access to the celestial councils, and their transgression was not an act of emotional rebellion like the fall of Lucifer, often described in later tradition, where pride and envy lead an angel to attempt to usurp the divine throne in a celestial coup. It was, instead, a technical violation of established boundaries, a breach of fundamental cosmic protocols, a transgression born not of hatred or ambition, but of something far more complex and disturbing. Desire, perhaps even something that could be interpreted as genuine love or attraction, combined with the impatience to wait for the appropriate time. The text of Enoch is very clear and specific about this. 200 of these watchers descended to Mount Hermon, a real mountain with a precise geographical location on the border between modern-day Lebanon and Israel, and there made a solemn pact, swearing to one another that they would take human women as wives and that none of them would back down even if the others failed. They were not seduced by external forces. They were not deceived by a cunning adversary who manipulated them. They did not act on impulse or in a moment of weakness. They made a conscious, deliberate, and coordinated decision to cross a boundary that separated domains that should remain distinct for reasons fundamental to the architecture of creation. The result of this union was the birth of the Nephilim, hybrid beings who had no place in the natural order of creation, giants who consumed the resources of the earth and eventually began to consume human beings themselves, creatures that were neither human nor angelic, but something ontologically impossible, something that should not exist. And parallel to this was the systematic introduction of knowledge that humanity was not prepared to process, wisdom that required a level of moral maturity that the human species had not yet developed. The Watchers' crime was threefold in nature and devastating in its consequences. They altered the human evolutionary line by introducing angelic genetics into human bodies, modifying the species' fundamental code in ways that could not be reversed. They transmitted knowledge before the time designated by the creational order, accelerating processes that should have unfolded gradually over millennia. And they mixed ontological domains that the basic architecture of the universe required to remain separate to maintain the stability of creation. This is not a moral sin in the common ethical sense of breaking a divine commandment due to human weakness. It is a structural crime against the integrity of creation. It is cosmic vandalism that compromises the very possibility of order and stability in the universe. The knowledge transmitted by the Watchers is detailed in Enock 8, with a precision that impresses modern scholars and suggests that the author of the text had considerable knowledge of the technologies and practices he was describing. Azazel, one of the leaders of the Watchers, taught men the manufacture of swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, essentially advanced military technology that allowed for the organization of professional armies and the waging of wars on a previously impossible scale. He also taught about metals and how to work with them, sophisticated metallurgical knowledge that transformed primitive societies based on subsistence agriculture into civilizations capable of organized warfare, long-distance trade, and the accumulation of wealth through control of mineral resources. Zemyaza, identified as the leader of the 200 Watchers who descended, taught incantations and root cutting, pharmacological and botanical knowledge that allowed for the manipulation of natural substances to alter states of consciousness, cure diseases, but also to poison enemies and create chemical dependencies. Amaros taught the solution of enchantments, that is, how to undo spells and break curses, knowledge that presupposes the existence of an operational magical system. Barakiel taught astrology, not in the modern sense of newspaper horoscopes, but the serious study of celestial movements and their correlation with terrestrial events. Kokabiel taught the signs of the stars, the interpretation of celestial patterns to predict future events. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds, practical meteorology for forecasting the weather and planning agricultural and military activities. Ezekiel taught the signs of the earth, geomancy, and understanding of terrestrial patterns. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun, allowing for precise time calculations and navigation. Sariel taught the course of the moon, crucial for lunar calendars and understanding natural cycles. And Tamiel taught about cosmetics, makeup, and beautification, knowledge that may seem trivial, but that actually profoundly transformed social structures by allowing manipulation of appearance and the creation of hierarchies based on artificial beauty. When we carefully analyze this list, we realize that we are not talking about morally neutral knowledge or knowledge simply useful for human development. We are talking about a complete package of capabilities that allow human beings to manipulate matter at fundamental levels, alter natural processes that should remain outside human control, read cosmic patterns, and predict future events. Essentially, assuming functions that were the exclusive prerogative of angelic beings. In a cosmological system where the universe operates through carefully calibrated stages of revelation, where each epoch has its own appropriate level of knowledge, where wisdom is gradually released as humanity develops the moral maturity necessary to handle it responsibly, what the Watchers did was equivalent to giving nuclear weapons to children, to handing over general artificial intelligence technology to a civilization that had barely mastered agriculture. They not only violated the temporal order of knowledge, not only broke the planned development timeline for humanity, they empowered the human species to interfere in processes that should remain completely beyond human reach for reasons of cosmic security, and this cannot be undone. Knowledge, once transmitted and absorbed by a culture, cannot be erased simply by eliminating those who taught it. Civilization, once transformed by new technologies and capabilities, cannot return to its previous state of innocence. The Watchers not only broke a divine rule, not only disobeyed a specific commandment, they permanently and irreversibly altered the course of human history, accelerated cultural evolution by thousands of years, and therefore their transgression is considered absolutely irreversible, unforgivable, because the damage caused transcends any possibility of reparation. The total and explicit absence of forgiveness in Enoch 21 is the most disturbing element of the entire narrative when we truly stop to consider its theological implications. Enoch 13 describes in detail how the Watchers, realizing they would be severely punished for their actions, that something terrible was about to happen to them, specifically asked Enoch to intercede for them before God, to present their case, to argue in their favor. Enoch, who had direct access to the divine presence in a way that no other human being had before or since, who walked among angels and participated in celestial councils, presented their petition with utmost seriousness. The answer was immediate, absolute, and completely final. There would be no forgiveness, no reconsideration, no second chance, no possibility of appeal. The text is explicit and leaves no room for alternative interpretation in stating that the Watchers will remain imprisoned in that place until the day of the great judgment. And even then, when all creation is reviewed and all beings are evaluated, there is no indication that they will receive mercy or clemency. There is no prophecy of restoration eventually occurring. There is no promise that after paying for their crimes over countless ages, they will finally be reintegrated into the celestial order. There is no suggestion that their suffering has a redemptive or educational purpose. The sentence is permanent and irreversible. And what makes this even more significant and disturbing is that not even angelic intercession is accepted, nor can even the mediation of the most righteous human who ever lived change the verdict. Enoch, who had sufficient authority to physically walk before God without being consumed, who had absolute moral credibility, who had never sinned or strayed, could not change the verdict even in a single degree. This indicates something absolutely fundamental about the nature of the Watchers' transgression. They committed the kind of error that makes a being ontologically incompatible with the continuity of creation. It is not simply that God chose not to forgive them because he was angry or disappointed. It is not that he is incapable of forgiveness due to some limitation in his nature. It is that certain acts alter the ontological nature of the transgressor in such a way that he can no longer function within the creational system without causing continuous instability. It is like a computer virus that has corrupted its own source code to the point that it can no longer be reintegrated into the program without destroying the entire operating system. It is like a machine part that has been altered in such a way that it no longer fits anywhere in the machinery, that it can no longer fulfill its original function, and that if forced back into the system, would cause catastrophic damage. The Watchers are no longer compatible with the order of creation, not by arbitrary decree, but by functional impossibility, and therefore must be permanently removed, not as punishment in the common moral sense, but as a necessary quarantine to preserve the integrity of everything else that exists. They have become, by their own choices, cancerous elements in the body of creation, and the only possible response is permanent surgical removal. The physical environment described in Enoch 21 is extraordinarily ordered when we examine the text carefully, and this is absolutely crucial to understanding the fundamental nature of this judgment. Enoch does not describe a chaotic place like the formless abyss described in some later apocalyptic texts. He does not describe a disordered hole in the fabric of reality where demons are thrown randomly without structure or organization. On the contrary, he describes with almost architectural precision columns of fire rising to immeasurable heights, perhaps even traversing multiple spatial dimensions, clearly defined boundaries separating different sections of the place. A deep pit whose dimensions seem to have been measured with mathematical precision. And constant vigilance carried out by angels specifically designated for this function, ensuring that absolutely nothing leaves that place, that none of the prisoners escape, not even temporarily. The fire described has peculiar properties that distinguish it from natural fire. It does not consume the bodies of the beings confined there. It does not gradually destroy them over time. It simply maintains an energetic barrier that physically separates them from the rest of creation, functioning as an insurmountable dimensional wall. The depth of the place is repeatedly mentioned with terms that suggest measurements beyond normal human comprehension, suggesting that there are multiple layers of separation between this location and the habitable universe, perhaps even existing in a parallel dimension that only touches normal reality at specific points. The text uses technical, almost architectural language to describe the structure, employing construction and measurement terms that suggest careful planning and precise execution. And this reveals something absolutely fundamental about the nature of this place. This place was planned well in advance, built even before the Watchers committed their transgression, as if it were already clear from the beginning of creation that eventually such a place would be necessary, specifically prepared to receive beings who became ontologically incompatible with the creational order. This is not a makeshift prison hastily constructed after an unexpected emergency. It is a meticulously designed confinement facility built to last until the end of time, to maintain its structural integrity through countless ages, to continue functioning without maintenance or active supervision. The extreme order of this place, its carefully planned structure, indicates extensive prior planning, absolute structural permanence, and clear administrative purpose. There is no chaos because fundamentally it is not about emotional punishment carried out by an angry God acting impulsively. It is architecture of exclusion, a system coldly designed to remove certain elements from operating reality without completely destroying them. Since total destruction is apparently not an option, keeping them in a state of suspended existence where they can no longer interfere with creation, where they can no longer influence events, where they can no longer interact with any other being. It is an ontological quarantine, a dimensional isolation, a permanent removal but not annihilation. And this distinction is crucial because it suggests that even beings who have become completely incompatible with creation cannot simply be erased from existence. Perhaps because their original creation was a divine act that cannot be completely undone, only contained and permanently isolated. Western Christian tradition, as it developed over the centuries following the first ecumenical councils, preferred to construct a systematic theology of moral hell rather than maintain the far more unsettling concept of structural judgment present in texts such as Enock. This was not necessarily a deliberate conspiracy or a conscious attempt to conceal uncomfortable truths from the masses, although there were certainly political decisions involved in the canonization of certain texts and the exclusion of others. It was, to a large extent, a natural and perhaps inevitable consequence of theological development as Christianity expanded and adapted to new cultural contexts. Early Christianity inherited multiple different Jewish traditions, some emphasizing mercy and others emphasizing justice, some preserving radical apocalyptic texts and others focusing on law and prophecy. As it expanded beyond its original Jewish context and penetrated the Greco-Roman world with its own philosophical categories and cultural expectations, it had to adapt its theological concepts for audiences who naturally thought in terms of retributive justice, individual guilt, proportionate punishment, and moral responsibility. The idea that certain beings simply cannot be forgiven, not for lack of divine will, but because they have become ontologically incompatible with creation through their own actions, is extremely difficult to process and accept within a theological system that strongly emphasizes universal mercy as a central attribute of God, the unlimited divine love that extends to all creatures without exception, and the possibility of redemption always available to anyone who sincerely repents. Western theology has systematically developed the doctrine of potential universal redemption, the comforting idea that any sinner, no matter how grave their crime or how deep their fall, can be forgiven and restored if they truly repent with a sincere heart and seek to return to God. This doctrine is so deeply rooted in modern Christian piety that any suggestion that there might be exceptions, that there might be absolutely undesirable transgressions, seems almost heretical, almost incompatible with the essential nature of a God defined primarily as love. Enock 21 fundamentally challenges this comfortable doctrine because it clearly suggests that there are absolute limits to creation, that there are errors of such magnitude that they place the transgressor permanently and irrevocably beyond the possibility of restoration, not through divine vengeance or arbitrary cruelty, but through the structural necessity inherent in maintaining the created order, through the ontological impossibility of reintegration without compromising the integrity of the entire system. And this is deeply uncomfortable for a theology that has built its identity around the idea of unlimited grace and boundless mercy, because it challenges the fundamentally comfortable idea that there is always hope, no matter what happens, that no error is absolutely final, that every being can eventually return to a state of grace if they genuinely desire it. The Western tradition's choice not to canonize the Book of Enoch, treating it as an interesting but not authoritative apocryphal or pseudepigraphal text, allowed Western Christianity to develop a more palatable and psychologically manageable narrative about salvation and damnation, a narrative where hell is certainly terrible and must be avoided, but is fundamentally understandable within human moral categories, where punishment is just and proportionate but not absurd or arbitrary, where there is always a clear logic of moral cause and effect operating transparently, where sinners go to hell because they chose to reject God repeatedly during their lives, and not because they committed some ontological crime that made them structurally incompatible with continued existence. When we examine the 21st Enoch narrative with modern eyes, applying contemporary conceptual frameworks and seeking parallels with our own civilizational situation, we find genuinely disturbing conceptual parallels with the ethical and existential dilemmas that contemporary humanity faces in relation to advanced knowledge and transformative technology. Humanity today, at the beginning of the 21st century, faces profound and potentially existential questions about genetic manipulation and editing of human DNA through technologies like CRISPR, increasingly powerful artificial intelligence, and eventually artificial general intelligence that may completely surpass human cognitive capacity, autonomous weaponry that can make lethal decisions without human intervention, anthropogenic climate change on a planetary scale that is altering systems that have remained stable for tens of thousands of years. And in each of these technological domains, there is a serious and urgent debate about whether we are crossing fundamental boundaries that should not be crossed, whether we are moving too fast without fully understanding the long-term consequences of our actions. Ancient texts like Enoch, when read not as mere curious historical artifacts, but as documents preserving wisdom about limits and consequences, suggest that the universe possesses structural boundaries, not only moral, but ontological, and that violating them can have irreversible consequences that go far beyond simple moral punishment or temporary suffering. Some contemporary scholars working at the intersection of religious studies and technological ethics observe intriguing parallels between the knowledge transmitted by the Watchers to early humanity and the technological dilemmas we face. Just as the Watchers gave early humanity transformative capabilities for which it had not developed the moral maturity or social wisdom necessary to use them responsibly, modern humanity is developing technologies whose long-term implications and second- and third-order consequences we cannot adequately predict or effectively control once unleashed. Enoch 21 is not merely an ancient narrative about punished angels. It is a disturbing revelation about the existence of absolute limits within the very structure of reality. It shows that there is knowledge which, once acquired, irreversibly transforms those who possess it. There are boundaries which, once crossed, allow no return. And there are acts that render a being permanently incompatible with the continuity of creation. This is not about emotional punishment nor divine vengeance, but about structural necessity. When the essence of a being is irreversibly altered, it can no longer exist within the order that sustains all that lives. The Watchers did not fall out of hatred or rebellion, but out of impatience, desire, and transgression of ontological boundaries. By mixing domains that should have remained separate, and by giving humanity knowledge for which it was unprepared, they altered the very architecture of creation. The result was not only moral chaos, but irreparable structural damage. Therefore, there is no forgiveness, no restoration, no return. Not because God refuses to forgive, but because reintegration has become ontologically impossible. This is Enoch's true warning. Not all advancement is progress, not all knowledge is wisdom, and not every door should be opened. There are lines that, once crossed, do not lead to evolution but to exclusion, and the most terrible judgment is not suffering. It is being removed from the narrative of creation while it continues without you. And perhaps even more unsettling is realizing how much this resonates with the dilemmas of our own era. When we dabble in genetics, artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, and forces we don't fully understand. Like the Watchers, we are touching on things from which there may be no return. If this type of in-depth reading provokes you, unsettles you, and makes you think beyond the obvious, subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. Your participation keeps this content alive.